But if we look at intention, then I think there are so many questions right now to about the willingness of the United States to actually be there. And I think it's come to the point where not only, I think I said before that Ukraine will have to look in a different direction for security guarantees after the war is over. It's basically the same thing for all the other NATO countries right now. Like the rug has been pulled away under the security guarantees that we thought we had.
Today, I'm delighted once again to be speaking with Anders Puck Nielsen, military analyst and influential YouTuber based in Denmark. He specializes in naval warfare and strategy. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about a whole range of issues. Of course, the peace process that is beginning. And I expect, I mean, peace, inverted commas, because I think the idea of peace with Putin is a very complex and tricky thing, but we're going to be exploring a whole range of issues relating to that, as well as Trump and all the rest of it as well. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Thank you to everybody who supports the channel. Thank you to everybody who has supported our fundraiser for drones. As many of you know, we've exceeded the target, and these night vision drones are going to be a huge assistance to several battalions, and hopefully will not only help with Ukrainian resilience to Russian aggression, hopefully they will also help to save lives. Thank you also to everybody who supports the work of Anders and myself, and everyone who is trying to create a more realistic version of Russia and why we need to defend against its revanchist aggression. Anders, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me back.
And I don't know if we can say where you are, but you're clearly not in your studio with all your usual, you know, toys and kit and tools, but you're out and about.
I am, yeah, I am visiting Kyiv. It's great to be here. It's actually my first time since the invasion, mostly because of bureaucracy back at home and my day job in the Danish military. So, but now things panned out, and I'm here, and it's great to be here and just get the feeling. And you know, it's quite paradoxical to come here just after this clash in the White House, you can say, where you had, uh, clearly the Donald Trump and JD Vance talking about how giving the impression that Ukraine is on the verge of collapsing and everything, the situation is so dire, and then you get to Kyiv and you really just experience a vibrant city that seems to function very well, and you can feel that, well, Ukraine is certainly under pressure, but it's it's not a country on the verge of collapse at all.
And from your military point of view, if you look at the incremental gains Russia has made over the last year, and you get in a map, you have to really zoom in quite close to see the distances because it's, geographically, it's not a huge amount of territory. I mean, yes, there's a few square miles, etc. But of course, Ukraine is vast. I mean, you're in Kyiv and you're many, many hundreds of miles away from the front. I think a lot of people don't really have a sense of the scale. So these Russian narratives, they circulate around, but they don't bear too much, resemblance to reality. Do you feel that when you're there? Obviously, the air raids are going off, but you are a long, long
Yeah.
way from the front lines.
Well, clearly, and I can also clearly see how, Ukrainians who are engaged in the war, Ukrainian soldiers could feel that maybe the distance to Kiev can be very big, and how, there can be some internal tensions in Ukraine between people who go on with their normal life in the big cities and those who are struggling on the front lines. But yeah, I mean, clearly there is very far from the city I'm experiencing here and to the front line. And uh, but I don't know that it's necessarily all. I mean, some of it is the Russians trying to push this narrative that Ukraine is in a very dire situation. But yeah, I think it's also just that war always feels worse from a distance in some extent. And you have the pictures we build up in the West about what it looks like. I mean, it's and then you get here and you find out that, well, life also just continues, and you've seen it. You've been here. You see the reactions of ordinary people to air raid alerts, and it's something people are very comfortable with that. Let's put it that way. And so, it's I think it's also just something that a picture that we in Western Europe also are happy to accept that this is a country under extreme pressure, and then you get here, you find out that it's actually also a country that it's very big, yeah, not just geographically, but also just in terms of population. That how many things they still manage to do. I mean, I'm impressed. I go places and they clearly still have resources to do all kinds of things that even in peacetime we would not have resources to do in Denmark. So it's just it's good to get here, get those experiences firsthand.
Well, once you're there, I'm sure there are some sorts of things you can't talk about and things that you can. Um, But I share that impression. I mean, when I was over in Lviv, on the way to Kyiv last time, and we met a number of different charities, rehabilitation charities, those creating drones. We met a team of really old grandmothers in their 80s and 90s who were making camo netting for Patriot missile batteries. So this extraordinary energy and resilience and effort and unanimity. But also I guess you will also hear voices that are in disagreement with each other, and you'll hear robust
Yeah.
debates because it has a vibrant democratic culture. Again, to counter one of the other Kremlin narratives that Ukraine is dictatorship. What of that impression have you got so far? You know, people sort of struggling to debate and argue and figure things out.
That's very clear. You meet people. People are very happy to discuss how they disagree with the government or how some all kinds of problems that Ukraine has. So it's clearly a very there is a strong democratic push here, and you will meet people very critical also of Zelensky. But my impression is also that when it comes to the war, people are really stand together, and also um, uh, everyone is talking about also how the how it's necessary to stand together when there is this external push, and not just from Russia, but also from the United States, and how almost everyone seems to agree that Zelensky is doing a pretty good job as a wartime president, even though many people were skeptical about how he was doing before the war. But yes, you can absolutely easily find Ukrainians willing to criticize all aspects of government life, and how the army is performing in this or that way, or how there needs to be reforms about this or that, or these debates are going on all the time, and I'm pretty sure you would not find that on the Russian side. So you can
Absolutely
definitely
not.
see
Yeah.
here how there is this potential here in uh, using this to create more frontline efficiency, simply because it's allowed to voice criticism, it's allowed to think for yourself and find solutions, and all these things.
Well, let's turn to the strategic side of things, because, of course, there are many things we could tackle. But let's start with Kursk, because that's the most recent, and it also ties in with some of the Russian narratives that seem to be being injected directly into the White House, directly to the president, probably to Elon Musk as well, without giving too much away. It seems to me that Trump, at the very least, possibly Musk and Trump, seem to have direct communication with Putin. Both have sort of hinted at that and admitted to some level of that. I suspect it's far more extensive. But there's this extraordinary narrative. Now, we know Ukraine has had to withdraw from Kursk. We know that part of that withdrawal was slightly chaotic because it's been suggested that quite a lot of valuable equipment has had to be abandoned. And of course, getting people out is the most important thing. But there was this extraordinary narrative that the Ukrainian army was cut off and surrounded, and thousands of people were about to be slaughtered. That seems to be an absolutely fictitious narrative, which not even the Z Patriots are pushing, but it's come directly into the White House and been amplified. What did you sort of make of that, and then of the wider sort of Kursk withdrawal?
Yeah, I think clearly mistakes have been made in terms of withdrawal and some equipment was left behind. I think this is also not the first time we see this. We've seen other withdrawals in other places from Ukraine where you could say that, it wasn't perfect execution of that. But I didn't see anything that indicated at all that this was a terrible situation at all for the Ukrainians. They seem to be getting out, overall just fine. And I think it's important to understand what the point was of the Kursk offensive. This was never territory that Ukraine expected to hold. So it was also always territory that Ukraine would trade for one thing or another. And basically, the point was to force the Russians to spend a lot of resources on pushing them out. And that to me seems to be what's going on. In the beginning, the Russians seem to believe that it wouldn't take all that many resources, so they could keep on pushing on several fronts at the same time. So you would see the Russians intensify things in eastern Ukraine while also just sort of trying to push the Ukrainians out in Kursk. That did not work, and over time they had to put more and more resources into this. And I think it's a very much a zero sum thing. If we look at Russian resources and Russian ammunition, the number of bombs that they can drop on Ukraine, they're going to drop all the bombs that they have, regardless, right? So from a Ukrainian point of view, it's just better that this is dropped in the Kursk region than that it is dropped in one of the Ukrainian ones. So I think what we're seeing right now is actually not really bad for Ukraine, um, in terms of forcing Russia to use these resources to basically, yeah, take some of their own territory back. And the Ukrainians are still there, by the way. I mean, it's not mission accomplished at this point for the Russians, so they're still holding on to some positions to make the Russians bleed as much as they can. Um,
Mhm.
and then there's been also a lot of talk about Kursk as a kind of bargaining chip. I think this was often a bit misunderstood in terms of bargaining for what. I never really saw Kursk as a kind of thing that, well, you can get this back if we get this back or something like. I more saw it as something that would make it very difficult for Putin to play the let's freeze the front line card when Donald Trump came in. So it was something that would force the Russians to keep on attacking, and that's important because we've ended up in this very predictable situation where it's basically about who gets the blame for the war continuing. It's more there's a blame game going on right now, and I think Kursk has served its purpose there. Um, but at this point, I think the strategic purpose of it is declining quite rapidly. It's not that important to keep it anymore. So it's a very sort of calculated thing. Stay as long as it makes sense, as long as you have a beneficial sort of ratio here. And once you don't, try something else.
And of course, I think that there is that sense, absolutely, that you say that it's sort of it could be a little bit in the way of Putin getting everything he wants and a sort of the quick and easy peace, which I think was always illusory. Um, what we see now, of course, is kind of interesting, and this is where I'm going to stray into the sort of more conspiratorial end of the debate that's been going on, because this isn't really a narrative you see in too many mainstream sort of media or even analytical publications, but it's something you actually do hear quite a lot from some Ukrainians and from some others who have a more, let's say, jaundiced, cynical view. And this is the withdrawal of US intelligence information that seemed to come almost exactly prior to this relatively surprise advance by Russia in Kursk. And it does seem that Russia has started to use some fairly advanced drone capabilities, it seems that they're not incapable of learning and innovating. And of course, if you want to gain the advantage of someone like Kursk, then having intelligence switched off would be a massive benefit in launching operation. So at the conspiratorial end, there are people who are linking this US decision to the retaking of Kursk. And strategically, I can see Putin would want Kursk back because it makes his negotiation process simpler. Would you sort of dismiss those conspiracies out of hand? Because, of course, they would shed an extremely negative light on the current US administration. Or is it worth having an open mind?
I I don't think the timeline really pans out the way you describe it there. I mean, it was a quite short period of time that intelligence sharing was turned off, and I think it's the intelligence that Ukraine gets from the United States is more the big picture thing, and I think the extra push in the Kursk region would have required, long-term, um, troop movements to get those into place there. So from even before the intelligence sharing was stopped. And I think on the more tactical frontline level there, Ukraine probably generates most of the intelligence on their own. So I don't really think that it is that directly related. Obviously, it's not good, but I think in this case, it's probably not the reason. I think actually it might be one of the reasons why we've seen recently the Ukrainians getting some momentum back in the Donbas area, that Russia has just over the course of a month or a month and a half actually reallocated resources somewhere else, and the Ukrainians have been capitalizing on that in a different region. So I think they have noticed.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, isn't it? Because they've been making advances in Toretsk and Pokrovsk and other areas where perhaps Russia has withdrawn forces to mass in Kursk. But here's a worry, isn't it? If let's take the intelligence off, because that could even be a distraction. It's quite clear that Russia has mounted a fairly sophisticated operation in Kursk with a certain element of surprise. The sort of mass and sophistication of their drone attack perhaps was not sort of predicted or countermeasures put in place. That is concerning, at least, is it not? Because if Russia is able to absorb these techniques and develop some, drone units outside of their more primitive meat wave attacks, this is a real threat, I would have thought, to Europe because we're perhaps far less practiced, in fact, not practiced at all in a warfare situation of using this sort of modern combined drone warfare.
I very much agree with that. I think it's a mistake to assume that Russia is not sophisticated in this area. The Ukrainians are probably, from a technical point of view, ahead, but I think we're talking on general maybe a couple of months ahead of the Russians, and then they manage to adapt, they manage to copy what they see, or and in some cases they also come up with genuine innovations in this. So, and I think you're right that the European armies, the armies of Western Europe, are just not at all prepared for this kind of warfare. And everyone I meet down here is really like, you have to you, you have to wake up here because you're going to get absolutely hammered if you're up against this. And I think that is true. If we see the way that our armies, the Royal Army, the Danish army, like if we were to meet the Russians in the Baltics, say, I think it would be a very, very dramatic learning curve, let's put it that way, before we would adapt to this kind of warfare. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, we have some equipment that is maybe in some ways better, but we just don't have the number of drone pilots that the Russians would be able to put up against us. And this is very significant. I mean, what the most the response that I think that maybe we could use, like that would be air power. It's possible that our combined air forces would be able to dominate in the air in a way the Ukrainian Air Force cannot. But I mean, the Russians are not terrible at air defense either. I think this is really an area where we need to wake up and understand that there is a new reality on the front line, and that the scale of drone operations is just massive.
Mm. And maritime, and it's in a number of different theatres as well. It's
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
land-based. Um, and this leads me to, I think, the sort of big topic. We're going to move into some sort of geopolitical type questions here. Um, and of course, the news headlines are dominated by this idea of peace, Trump's peace initiative, Putin now responding to that tentatively. Yes, peace inverted commas, or we could go for a ceasefire, but now of course he's going to impose a whole raft of different conditions. But if we take a step back, and we've discussed Putin a lot, we've discussed his mindset in this imperial revanchism. Um, it seems to me that despite all the talk of peace, and even if there is some kind of ceasefire or freezing of the conflict, whether it be a month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, however long it seems to me that Putin's long-term ambitions is to attack and degrade the European Union and to try to create, division and resentment in Europe that breaks, trust and our unity. Would it be, in your view, are we still closer to war than to peace as a continent?
I I think I don't think we are close to peace in Ukraine. If that's if we begin there, I think the only reason why we talk about this right now is that this is what the Americans want. And the Americans are such an influential player in this that if they insist on talking about peace, then everyone has to talk about peace. But really, it doesn't seem to me that anyone else believes that this is close. So it's a kind of theatrical thing going on where people pretend that this is a real process and to please Donald Trump. But it is somehow it's detached from reality because we are not actually at a point in the war where the conditions are met uh, for the hostilities to end anytime. So I mean it might even come to a kind of ceasefire. I don't know. But I don't think we're anywhere close to a durable uh, conclusion to the war. Um, and it's a strange uncertainty that has been injected into the whole warfighting thing because uh, until Trump took office, we could sort of say, okay, what are the teams here? But Trump really seems to be pushing this thing about, well, we just need peace now, here and now, and he's going to punish whoever he believes is the obstacle. And for a while, that seemed to be the Ukrainians, and we saw the stop of intelligence sharing, the stop of American aid. Now it's back on track. I think there is a high likelihood that Trump is going to flip-flop again, and we're going to see all these things stop once more. So it's a new dynamic where clearly the United States is not a reliable partner in this, but it's still such a big partner, and there is potential access to so many resources that Ukraine kind of has to play along. Um, but it's also becoming clear that the United States is not, a basis for building the long-term structures. This has got to be some kind of transition period where Europe becomes more central, and also that all this talk about security guarantees and a post-war sort of European security order that has to be centered around a European structure for security and not something that is based on the Americans.
And this is extraordinary, isn't it? Because Trump, despite proclaiming how good he is at business, and we won't get into tariffs, that's a whole other thing. But it seems that the doubts he's injected about, the reliability not of American weapon systems, but the reliability of the US as a partner, potentially being able to freeze or brick the advanced systems that it provides. We're now seeing Canada reconsidering a $13 billion F-35 program. Portugal has actually cancelled one. We've got Germany now reconsidering a massive order of F-35s. This is hugely damaging, especially given how much the F-35 has cost to develop. You know, I think we're into trillions rather than billions of dollars now. This is an economic as well as a military disaster for the US, surely.
It is, and it's very short-sighted. I think I, I don't think anyone who actually understands these things will be able to explain how it's a good thing for the United States in the long term to push away all their allies. Um, how is this going to help the United States in a competition with China, for example? I can't see that. So um, it's hugely damaging. It's going to be, you know, the system that has existed for about 80 years with the United States as a kind of center, uh, a security hub, has been hugely beneficial for the United States, and that's what they're throwing away. And but I think it's been sort of a long time coming, right? But something over the last month, beginning at the Munich Security Forum, really has, made this true. So I think in the big perspective, there's been a long time talk about how the Russians, the Chinese, they want to push the world into this multipolar world order, and now we're there. And surprisingly, I mean, I never thought about it this way, but surprisingly, it looks like the United States and Europe are going to be two separate poles in this new multipolar world order. But to some extent, everything is up in the air because this is where we are now, and you get into all kinds of questions about what does that actually mean then for where is China going to position themselves? Like if they can more or less declare mission accomplished on that, right? Is it necessarily are they necessarily going to be continuing to align with Russia in this world order, or are we going to see rapprochement with Europe, for example? I don't know. There's so many uncertainties right now.
And it would suggest, I mean, I had this interesting conversation yesterday with a Ukrainian analyst suggesting that actually Russia's interests in Europe and China's may be very different. China would not want to see an invasion of Europe because the economic damage to them in particular would be enormous. But as you say, mission accomplished if they can ease the US out as the partner of choice and China can ease itself in. That means at some point Russia's going to have to take a back seat. This is fascinating. And Denmark finds itself right at the center of global affairs in a way, and I don't mean this as an insult, in a way that has not happened for some time, if not for a century or more. Here you are being threatened by the US to annex Greenland, of all places, where the US already has major military facilities. So it's not as if China or Russia just walk in. The US already has a presence there, and indeed, in normal circumstances, could almost certainly negotiate a larger presence if it was felt to be necessary. How is this, both as a Dane, but also from your military strategic point of view? I mean, how threatening is this, and how insane are the threats that are being made to Denmark?
I think they, on a scale of insanity, I think it's pretty high up there. Um, I think the important thing to understand is that Denmark today is really, in some ways, to be understood as a kind of federation between three different countries. So there's Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and Denmark, and we're sort of together in this kingdom. Yeah, so I think the normal perspective in Denmark would be that Greenland is actually a different country. So it's not ours, it's the country of the Greenlanders. But of course, it's our responsibility to stand up for their interests. And there is absolutely no support in Greenland for actually becoming a part of the United States. And that is the position we have to support in this. So I think from a Danish point of view, it's it's insulting, it's frustrating, but it's on a different level, I think, from what the Canadians are experiencing, because they're basically experiencing the same kind of thing, but for them, it's more directly their country. Here, it's really the Greenlandic nation that feels under pressure. And it makes absolutely no sense from a security point of view. Like, exactly what is it that the United States would want to do in Greenland that they can't do today? It's very difficult to see how they would benefit from that. The only thing I can see is that if they're preparing for a post-NATO situation where Greenland will no longer be, where Denmark will no longer be allied with the United States, in that case, I mean, they could miss this access. But why would they be preparing for that? Um, but as long as NATO exists and is healthy, then they don't gain anything from annexing this island.
Mm. Unless the disintegration of NATO is the point. Well, we'll come to that in a minute because
Right.
NATO is an interesting question. But on the point of Canada, it's of course it's an independent sovereign nation, but the head of state is the King of England in Canada. So there's
Oh,
another
okay, yeah.
another strange little complication there. I mean, literally, we would be obliged to declare war on the US if they were to annex Canada. We would be in a state of war almost automatically with the US.
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting. You're in that case sort of in this in the same boat with us about
yes.
Greenland. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's quite similar. And the idea of Trump making these pronouncements and visiting the King of England, as that offer has not been rescinded, that second state visit is due to happen. So yeah, an extraordinary kind of situation. Well, let's turn to NATO then, because it seems to me, already 6 months ago, we were having conversations. I was asking people like Ben Hodges and others about the state of NATO, and my fear at that point was that NATO has had so many people sort of go through it as, very competent analysts, diplomats, military people. And we saw at the 75th anniversary this, sort of self-celebration, self-congratulation of what a good job that has been done. Already then, it seems to me that in the Kremlin, they are not looking at NATO as the organization it was during the Cold War. They're not seeing it as a strong deterrent body in the way it would have been seen in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And if the Kremlin has doubts about NATO's unity and determination, if they have doubts about the efficacy of Article 5, then NATO, in some respects, starts to resemble a zombie institution. And before we hit record, we were going through some of the comments of Mark Rutte, which are extremely sort of disturbing and further suggest to me that it has become this zombie institution, which has a view of itself which no longer accords to reality. He came out and he said that as soon as peace is agreed, we should lift all sanctions against Russia, which to my mind is an extraordinary insanity to arm Putin when his ultimate aim is further aggression. He also has now apparently taken Ukrainian membership absolutely off the table. That is another one of Putin's sort of Istanbul demands. And I dread to think what else might come out. So what's your view on NATO? I mean, is it no longer the core security guarantee that Europe and Ukraine now need?
Yeah, in terms of if we just take deterrence, we can say there are two aspects here. There's the capability side and there is the intention side, right? And if we look at just raw military capability, then obviously the NATO countries have enormous power, especially, just the United States military on its own is, uh, very strong compared to the Russian one. But if we look at intention, then I think there are so many questions right now to about the willingness of the United States to actually be there. And I think it's come to the point where not only, I think I said before that Ukraine will have to look in a different direction for security guarantees after the war is over. It's basically the same thing for all the other NATO countries right now. Like, the rug has been pulled away under the security guarantees that we thought we had. And um, The problem with NATO is really, I mean, I've always been one of those who said that, well, the alternative to a NATO with the United States as a strong partner is, or as a member here, is just continuing NATO without the United States because it's still a good framework. It has all the bureaucracy, the procedures. It includes all the other members of NATO. But actually, I think we need a discussion about how to actually, paradoxically, it's actually a problem if the United States sort of abandons the idea of NATO but still remains in NATO, because if we can't trust the United States, then it doesn't really work that we have the United States tied into pretty much everything in the alliance. If we can't trust that the Americans will be on our support here, our side here, I think there's been for a long time people have been thinking the United States might withdraw and Europe might have to take a bigger sort of share of the burden on European security, but now it's not unthinkable that the United States is actively undermining European security and maybe even having dialogue with our adversary. That is a huge problem if the same United States is a part of our command chain.
That,
So
yeah, yeah.
this is by far the biggest crisis that NATO has been in since the inception. And I don't know what the answers are, but I think it's something we have to move quickly on, and we have to figure out how to, um, establish coherent deterrence in Europe, regardless of where the United States is.
This has absolutely hit the nail on the head because when I was listening to Mark Rutte, my thoughts were that what you've got is Trump in the last couple of weeks has sort of announced, of course, sometimes he rolls these things back, but it's been announced that there will be a troop withdrawal of US troops from Europe, a mass withdrawal. They might leave some in Hungary, highly symbolic, the least democratic member of the European Union and the one most aligned with Moscow's interests. It has also been announced the US will not be participating in what have been traditional NATO exercises. So that is nominally a kind of withdrawal from the key functions of NATO and European deterrence. But as you say, it's not necessarily Putin's style to destroy institutions. The Russian way of autocracy is to render those institutions into zombie institutions, to reduce their credibility, to reduce their effectiveness from the inside out. And it seems to me Mark Rutte, as a very effective politician, is probably deciding to park some of the values, park some of the core deterrence capabilities to keep the Americans on side, to keep them in, to stop the whole thing falling apart. But as you suggested there, that could be the worst of both worlds because it prevents decisive action and it prevents countries facing the reality that they need to organize coalitions of the willing, let's say.
Yeah, but I don't know. Let's also not be too harsh on Rutte because really, that is his job, right? His job is to be the General Secretary of NATO. So of course he has to. Um, I mean, an organization that still has the United States as a member. He has to talk nice things, say nice things about the Americans, and he has to talk about this as if NATO is the answer to all the challenges of the future, right? So I wouldn't really expect an alternative to come from Rutte. And then obviously, I don't think he handled the meeting in the White House well. I think he was way too submissive to Trump, and I think we saw both Starmer and Macron doing a better job of actually, correcting that, standing a bit up for themselves, but still keeping the good tone. But it's also not easy with the job that he has, because it is his job to keep Trump on his side, right?
And if he said NATO is no longer effective, he wouldn't have a job, if we're going to be cynical. He'd be talking himself out of a
Absolutely.
job.
Yeah.
Um, let's get on to, because a lot of what you've said here kind of is leading towards the idea that very quickly we may see, and this has been talked about for decades, but finally the impetus is there. We may see a European army. We may see a European industrial base to actually underpin substantial production of advanced weaponry sourced on this continent rather than the components being sourced outside it. We may also be moving towards the idea of a common European nuclear deterrent with countries like Poland, possibly even Ukraine, Germany, initially coming under the nuclear umbrella of France, which has a genuinely, self-sourced technology, and Britain, which is using American technology. But again, if we fast forward, how reliable will it be for us to source the next generation of nuclear deterrent? So on all these key things, industry, army, and nuclear umbrella, we could be seeing the emergence of Europe as a new military superpower slowly, but it seems to be pointing towards that direction.
It does. The investments that are now announced are big, and they will definitely, take Europe in that direction. Um, you raise a very good question on the nuclear issue. I mean, because that's the other thing that this American-led sort of world order has basically been the foundation of the non-proliferation arrangements that we have. The idea that all the democratic countries around the world, they don't really need nuclear weapons because there is the United States and there is the American nuclear umbrella that is covering them. And now suddenly, if we don't trust the United States as a security partner, then well, basically the American nuclear umbrella is not it's not useful for us. I mean, it, it there is going to come a very serious discussion about this, and I do fear that the we're going to see proliferation of nuclear weapons as a result of this, both in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, East Asia, obviously, but you know, once the lid is off, this might happen in many places. So that's also a consequence of American withdrawal. But it's clear that it's not a good solution that for the democratic countries that the only countries in the world who have nuclear weapons are the autocracies. So something has to happen here, and building on either the French, the British, or something entirely new.
Well, there's just two areas I want to focus in. We could almost certainly talk for hours given the sort of sheer scale of what's going on at the moment. But let's turn to this idea of peace. Let's say that there is a temporary ceasefire and that ceasefire does extend beyond the 30 days. Not that Putin's, extremist or expansionist demands are met. That's very unlikely to be the case. But that there is some kind of, extended or elongated peace or ceasefire. This, of course, supposes that there will be a substantial European presence, certainly British and French, to try and sort of help police that frontier. But from what you've observed of the experience of the Minsk Accords, isn't it likely that peace will not be a cold peace? It will be a very hot peace with provocations, with intermittent violence, with extraordinary lies, especially coming from the Russian side, to try and sow division amongst the so-called allies.
Yeah, I think, there is a lot of talk about peacekeepers and who would be willing to send, their troops to take part in such a peacekeeping operation. I think that's I don't know. It's as I see it, a very hypothetical, very honestly quite strange discussion because I don't really see a role for peacekeepers like that, and I don't think that's how we should think about it. The idea that we would have the Ukrainians and the Russians sort of separated by, I don't know, some demilitarized zone, and then we would have the peacekeepers in between to make sure that nothing happens. I don't that's not how it's going to pan out at all. First, that's not the European countries just don't have the strength to do that. It would, we don't have the armies to actually do that, right? We might be able to do something for the, let's say, the first 6 months or so, but then like who's going to replace those if this is like, and also, would the European countries really be willing to take the fight and, fulfill that task? And finally, of course, Russia is not going to approve of that. So that kind of arrangement would require that both sides agree that we're going to have this peacekeeping force in between. And, I think the way we have to think about this going forward is that these European forces would be in Ukraine conducting the same types of operations that they do in the Baltic countries today. So that is, they would be there as a direct allied force with the Ukrainians to step in and fight the Russians if something were to happen. That seems much more realistic to me, both because it's something that Russia might be forced into accepting at some point if they are under enough military pressure. You could see how that could be the outcome of this. Also, because it would require a smaller footprint. It wouldn't be the European forces having to cover the entire front line. It could be actually in a more sort of protracted role, but just being in country somewhere. Um, and it's something that could be a part of a new security structure for all of Europe, where it's there is some kind of alliance structure that includes Ukraine. So it's about Ukraine, but it's also about the rest of Europe and how Ukraine would also play a pivotal role in the defense of the Baltic states, for example, through this alliance structure.
And, could we also play a role in, say, closing the skies, closing the seas, or at least ensuring that, there is a deterrence there against threat in both of those domains?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting to see how this Sky Shield initiative sort of suddenly popping up as a possible, a discussion. It's very similar to what I guess a no-fly zone would look like. That was a discussion years ago, right? Suddenly these things are on the table. But I think it demonstrates that paradoxically, what is happening, but when the Americans withdraw from being this uh, supporter, strong ally of Ukraine, that has actually made it more important to the European countries that that Ukraine cannot lose this war. Ukraine has to come out of this war in a sort of good position. It has to be supported to the end, and that might actually force some European countries into taking these steps that they weren't prepared to take before. But in some way, you can say it's a kind of luxury situation to be in, to say that we don't want to commit directly in country, for example, with some kind of air cover. That is only possible as long as you have enough resources to send and the Ukrainians can do the task itself. Now, if you withdraw a big lump of those resources, that might require some other initiatives, such as this thing. Um, so I think we might see some of those taboos being broken going forward, especially if the Americans withdraw entirely. That might pull in the European countries into something like the Sky Shield mission or even something else. In-country training is another thing where, I mean, why is it that we're transporting all these Ukrainians to Britain to receive basic training when it would be a lot more efficient to take the trainers and transport them to Ukraine, right? That's also a luxury that we might not be able to have in the future.
And the last question there, of course, is that we also need to look out for our own defense. And there is alleged to have been an extraordinary array of sabotage and provocation across Europe. I know there are ongoing investigations into many that are as yet unconfirmed, but of course, there are many of these incidents that just seem far too coincidental. And it may well be in the fullness of time, Russia is shown to be, a very active adversary. Is your fair symptom mind that these kind of incidents not only will continue, but if there is sort of nominal peace or a freezing of the conflict in Ukraine, that actually we could see an uptick in hybrid provocations from Russia, sabotage, arson, this kind of stuff, even up to the level of assassination?
At the moment, I would say I think we should see all these things, the hybrid things, the as a way that Russia is trying to bring the war home to the Europeans. So it's a way of putting direct pressure on us, making us feel the consequences of supporting Ukraine. And ironically, I think that the more pressure Russia is under in Ukraine, the closer they are to losing, the more they are going to double down on this. So uh, the better things are for Ukraine, the bigger the risk is of these very intense attacks on especially the European countries. But I mean, depending on how the United States stands, also the United States. Um, that also means that actually right now, I think the risk right now is probably reduced a bit because the Russians see that they might actually have a chance of just basically persuading Donald Trump into giving them what they want. So why would they take risks in the hybrid thing? But I think over time, this is going to come back and it's going to be more and more intensive. And I actually don't. I think it's a mistake to just say that this is just hybrid things. I think you actually underplayed the risk a little bit, even though I think you think you put it pretty high. But I think I would not limit this to assassinations, for example. I could see direct violations of Article 5 as part of this, as part of trying to put Western Europe under pressure. Something we sometimes forget in the West is that this is actually a war that Russia is fighting, and that it is real. It is actually them, and that people are going to do almost anything to avoid losing a war. So the closer we get to a point where Russia is about to lose the war in Ukraine, then they will be willing to take bigger and bigger risks and to push harder and harder in other areas to somehow just make it stop. So we have to be prepared for that because on the one hand we have to push towards Ukrainian victory. That is absolutely essential. As I cannot see how Europe can balance Russia in the future without Ukraine. Ukraine is absolutely essential for European security after the United States is withdrawing here. So on the one hand, Europe has to push toward that, but at the same time, that is going to create, at least for a while, a more volatile situation where Russia will be willing to do dramatic things to turn things around.
Well, Anders, that's where we're going to have to call a halt. I know we could probably throw a million more questions at you, but you have a lot of things to experience in Kiev, a lot of people to speak to, and of course, when you come back, it would be fantastic to hear your impressions of that, because your perspective is massively valued by the community as it is. And now you're enhancing that with experience on the ground talking to people. So that will be absolutely invaluable. But for today, thank you so much.
Well, thanks, and I'm sorry we had to end on such a depressing note there. I was kind of hoping you'd have some kind of question more that could lead in a more optimistic direction. But well, I guess this
Oh
is where
well,
we are.
all I can say on a positive note is enjoy Ukrainian food, which is chemical-free, additive-free, unbelievably flavoursome, and yeah, let's yeah, at least
It's
yeah.
actually it's amazing. It's amazing. Yes, I noticed that already.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you'll be probably considerably. It's a good job they won't weigh you, on your way out of the country because there might be a big differential from your arrival weight. But anyway, enjoy the food, enjoy the Ukrainian hospitality.
Thank you.